But first, here is the category description for documentary long form. A structured presentation with dramatic impact of an event, individual, or situation of current cultural and or historical significance, or a creative in-depth treatment of a topic presented in a factual and informative manner. Can be filmed by one person or more, must have debuted during the contest year. Higher weight will be given to documentaries with stellar photography or videography that elevates the presentation without distracting from the story. Long form has a runtime greater than 30 minutes. So, of the pieces that you've watched, hopefully you guys took good notes. Is there any pieces that you need to scrub through or rewatch, or do you feel comfortable to go into the Google Doc and maybe start ranking?
I'd like to maybe discuss them before we go straight to ranking. Is that cool? Not all of them. Well, there's some that I don't feel the need to, but
okay. Yeah, let's do
are we
that.
watching? We're not watching them, right?
No, we're not watching them,
Okay.
but you're right. They should have discussion for each one. That is a good point. So I will let's start with 32 days. It should be in the order that you guys watched them. So with 32 days, Raquel, if you want to go first.
Honestly, this one I didn't really connect to. I wasn't really engaged. I felt like I was seeing a lot of the same scene over and over again. 5 minutes in, I think I wrote, I don't still really know exactly what this is about. And yeah, I just wasn't compelling. I don't know. I thought I was excited actually because it was a small town community story, but I wasn't engaged visually throughout the story.
Nathan Thompson.
I'm not. Is this the hockey one?
Yes.
Oh, okay, copy that. I had a different title for it. I mean, I thought there was a lot of nice effort put into it. They covered, they traveled with the team to many different cities. They had some nice establishing shots of each city to kind of establish where you are. There's some beautiful mountain vistas. I liked how they picked out some unique characters in each location. They captured some kids' excitement and some relationships between father and kid, in kind of just figuring out the excitement level in the city for finally getting a new hockey town. I really liked how they mounted GoPros on the Zamboni and interviewed the Zamboni driver as he was moving along. I thought that was one of the more creative and interesting perspectives in the whole documentary. He seemed like a character. Let's see. Yeah, there's some good drone videography. There were some light touch graphics with some photos on a wood background that were fine, not necessarily meant to impress. I thought the ending was creative. It was a single take gimbal shot that ended on the narrator, and he had one final line delivery. It was a long take floating through the entire complex, and then it ended just on him with one final line. I thought that was a pretty creative way to end. The scope of it was pretty big. They stuck with the story for, 32 days, I guess. So, they had some commitment level there to follow the story. In terms of connecting with it, I wouldn't say I was gripped, wanting to see, are they going to win their first game or anything. It was just kind of along for the ride. But it didn't have my emotions going like up and down. I just thought, hey, this is a cool, feature sports piece that the local community probably cares to watch and is interested in.
Priya.
Yeah, like Raquel, I wasn't totally gripped by this one. I was kind of looking forward to it because I thought a sports story, very action oriented. I'm going to be excited watching this. I want to see if they're going to win the thing. But in my notes, I wrote, I like the opening. I like the music. I thought the editing was pretty good. But after that, I wrote too long, dragged on a bit. There, after like 10 minutes, I think, I was starting to lose interest. So this one wasn't my favorite one. And visually, like nothing really stuck out to me about this one.
And Nathan O'Neill.
Yeah, I think along the same lines. I'm a big hockey fan, so I was looking forward to something truly compelling, kind of feeling like E60 kind of style, but it didn't quite hit the mark there. I felt, for me, documenting this kind of journey to this new team and the effort that it took to get there could have been probably more effective without the track, without the narration. Because there would have been so much news coverage of this anyway that could have been weaved in underneath, maybe given a different texture to it. But yeah, as far as the visuals, nothing really stellar that stuck out to me, except for the Zamboni shot. I was like, oh, that's creative. I might steal that at some point. But yeah, editing was solid, but I just didn't feel like it was exceptional.
Gotcha. The next one, Between the Lines, Photojournalism and the Crossfire. We'll start with Nathan O'Neill.
Yeah, this was just like nonstop packed with visuals, right? Visuals and nats, and it was just kind of 0 to 60 real fast, and kept going. I really actually enjoyed the dynamic of the interviews that were in kind of the black and white style versus the color for what they actually were documenting. So I feel like that gave us a visual cue of that was like kind of behind the lens, so to speak. Yeah, it was visually interesting. I didn't really find like the beginning to end narrative necessarily, but I thought it was well edited. There were some pretty jarring kind of moments where you're watching some really graphic video and graphic images that were just kind of gut-wrenching. And that's why you're there, right? Is to document what's happening, and to show what would not have been shown otherwise. So I commend them for that. Yeah, I think it was overall a nice little look behind this community of photojournalists in this city, and kind of their take on life on the ground,
Ragat.
Visually, I thought this was like you said, like jam-packed. I felt like the Marvel movie of like photojournalists like on the ground. And I was especially excited to see it because that's literally been my reality for the last 2 years. And I was excited that this topic came up and that it was being shown in that way. I loved the stylistic choice of it being black and white interviews and then very, like kind of oversaturated, very colorful, very intense imagery when it came to the actual events that occurred. I almost wish they would have gone a little deeper into the photojournalist life, that it wasn't just the recordings of that day. Like they said, they had sleepless nights, that they had to file like in the car, and we all do. And so it would have been cool to have that footage as well, like the behind the scenes, when you go home and it's just like quiet and you're just sitting there with that whole night and like all that adrenaline is rushing through you. Like I was hearing them talk about it and I was just like, yep. So it would have been cool to go deeper, to go that much further into their experience. And I really like, this was one of like my favorites actually, but then they didn't have a single Black journalist. And there are plenty of Black journalists and photojournalists in Portland. And considering the topic of what it is that they were covering, I felt like they lacked depth because they didn't go that much further. Like, imagine if we're talking really the experience of a journalist in that situation, imagine being a Black journalist and a Black photojournalist. Like, it's just, it felt like it was missing another, like a very important layer, a few important layers. But visually it was like, man, I wish all of those layers would have been included, because visually it was engaging and it kept me like watching. But those few things just, I felt like they didn't go deep enough.
Yeah, Raquel, I thought you hit like all the really important points there, so I don't have much to add. I mean, just looking at my notes, strong opening, visuals were very strong. This was a very visual forward piece, which I really appreciated. I too really liked the color contrast with the interviews. Obviously cinematography is great. I think the points that Raquel and Nathan made about the narrative was sort of like where I was struggling. Just in terms of like my ranking notes, this was kind of like in the middle for me. This was like one of the two that I felt were like in the middle, because visually it was very strong, but narratively there were some gaps, and we were missing some pieces with like the sort of story structure and sort of I think that sort of like interrupted some of the cadence of the full presentation.
Nathan Thompson.
Yeah, I think overall, I lean towards this being one more like one of my favorites. Probably because I felt like it's not only a representation of the filmmakers making the doc, but it's also a representation of the filmmakers within the film, which I thought was pretty cool. It's like when you're seeing the video of the riots, it's not just stock video, like that it's coming from the people who you're actually talking to, which I thought was a nice like connective thing there. Yeah, I thought overall, I thought it was really interesting where they talked about being bonded by trauma. One of the photographers said, "Repression is my best skill." So Aisha, I feel like that kind of speaks to your question earlier, where it's like, how do you deal with this stuff? And it's like that guy, he just represses it, maybe he doesn't handle it in the best way. And I thought this really just showed the absolute courage of these journalists. And one other comment that they made was that the spot that you need to be is right there. And they were just like right in the action, up close and personal, not using like the telephoto lens to zoom in from far away. They were freaking like right in the mix. And then I liked how it ended, in color. The whole thing was in black and white with the interviews, and then they went to color portraits of them with their like riot gear on, which I thought was a nice like development, way to end it with a bang.
Nice.
I appreciate Raquel's points though about the narrative and some of the things that it lacked, because I didn't quite pick up on those things, but looking back, I agree.
Next, we have Day of Rage, how Trump supporters took the U.S. Capitol. We'll start with Nathan Thompson.
I guess this one kind of feels like the Rittenhouse piece a little bit. I don't know if they were both New York Times. I feel like they were kind of similar. Man, yeah, it was just very comprehensive. I thought that the time frame where they showed simultaneous footage of Trump speaking and then real time someone on their cell phone like documenting what other people in the crowd were saying, like right as Trump was speaking, you heard other people saying like, we're going to storm the Capitol. It was crazy for them to like sync up the timelines like that. Um, did an incredible job of picking out like the key groups and leaders and tracking them through every step of the way, and circling their faces and like, this is this group, this is this leader. You really couldn't miss a beat how clear they were about who was involved and what room in the Capitol they were in. It was an astonishing overview of the lack of police presence and protective gear, especially early on, when it was pretty clear that, unlike in all of the other, George Floyd, marches or anything like that, where it's police in absolute riot gear, these police just don't even have shields. They're just like, so that was crazy to see. So I think this was overall one of my higher picks.
Nathan O'Neill.
Yeah, I think I pretty much just wrote down like extremely comprehensive and chilling, just to rewatch everything in almost a real time, right? I mean, it's almost a forensic kind of approach, kind of like the Rittenhouse. I guess like the one place that I'm struggling with on how to rank this personally is the lack of like original interviews or original video. And I don't know if you can give any guidance on that, Ray, because at least in the prompt, it's more weight is given to like photography and videography. So, I mean, does that mean we should discount it because there's not as much original? I mean, I don't think there is any original, right? It's all social media or video taken from news clips.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to discount it because it didn't have it. I think altogether, if there is a piece that had all the components, and if this stacks up there with it, but if there's one where the photography was just through the roof, like that would be the differentiator. Higher
Gotcha.
weight will be given documentary with stellar photographer and videography. But it starts off with, it's a structured presentation with dramatic impact of an event, individual, situation of current or cultural or historical significance, or a creative in-depth treatment of a topic presented in a factual, informative manner.
Right.
And be filmed by one or more person. There's really no.
Got it.
It was filmed by a lot of people.
Right.
And
Right,
who's to
right.
say that photography, videography wasn't stellar in its own sense. So
Right.
the rules are kind of vague there, but I think that's just to kind of help with like, if there was two neck and neck, the
Right.
higher weight should go to the one because it's the best of photojournalism.
Right.
Best.
Okay. And maybe this for discussion later, but I guess like for me personally, I would be like, this one compared to a Rittenhouse, I feel like Rittenhouse would have the upper hand just because of that added element of, the interviews and the extra effort that was made visually. But that said, I mean, it's compelling. It's very compelling, very detail oriented, well produced, and I feel like it gives you a very methodical rundown of what happened that day. So.
As we're going through this, and this brings up a good point of discussion. So this is long form, and then after this, we'll select documentary of the year. I'm gonna go ahead and read the category description for documentary of the year because it might help. It will be selected by you guys from all the documentary finalists, not the winners, the finalists. So of all the pieces that you've seen. So it doesn't have to be the first place winner. It's just, the finalists. The award recognizes a documentary series that achieved a high standard of quality in photography, editing, and overall storytelling that is unmatched by any other documentary in the division. Selection as documentary of the year honors excellent, and most importantly, it serves to raise the standards of the industry. So keep that in mind as you're ranking things, that maybe if it doesn't win in this specific category, it may still win overall in documentary of the year. Let's see here. Next up, we have, let's go to Rocky.
I thought this was just brutal and honest and like really raw and detailed. And like, I felt like I was there as I was watching this. I wrote down literally, I felt that it was like a textbook. Like you could show this in a school to show exactly what happened, play by play by play. I loved the graphics that were showing you where and how things were all taking place. Cause you know, one thing is to hear it on the news and to like take it in, but like to see like the strategy behind it, the way people moved in those spaces, the reactions and how the words caused, cause you know, you read it on the news, Trump said this and it caused this, but to see them live, like you said, Nathan, like side by side was just, I was dumbfounded throughout this whole documentary. I was super engaged. What else did I write? Oh, I did note that there was no first person accounts. There wasn't that human element as far as who are these people, why, like that element I felt was missing. But otherwise, I thought it was just so detailed and jam-packed with educational information. It was also highly ranked for me.
And Miss Matthew.
Yeah, no surprise. So when I was watching these, this would have been my number one pick. Just from like a sort of, again, like holistic view. I wrote down really well written and produced and researched, journalistically very strong. I love these sort of like visual forensics investigations. I really do think like this is like the future of investigative journalism. Very gripping and compelling. I'm struggling with Nate O'Neill's point of like no original interviews, because that is a really great point. But then also like who would be the original interviews when, you know, these people are potentially wanted criminals and they probably wouldn't appear on camera. I don't know, maybe it could be, you know, it's like a blur of the face and you're using audio. I don't know who would say yes to doing this, but that is a very good point. So I'm thinking about that now. But when I was watching these, this was the one that really like stuck out to me from start to finish, and just obviously very strong visually. I'm really compelled by the video evidence parts of these, and the Rittenhouse was very similar in sort of like creating that timeline, and how, to Raquel's point, this is something you could show in journalism school, just like just a really strong use of visuals in an investigation piece. So yeah, it's really high for me, but I am thinking about the points that were raised. So stay tuned.
The next one.
Hey Ray, this is just an idea overall. Is there such a thing as like best produced documentary?
Something to noodle on for next year.
Yeah, just for the future. I don't know.
For sure. And I think afterwards, like I would love to meet up with you guys afterwards, since this is our first year, and just do kind of a breakdown in ways to improve this category, or just kind of a brainstorming session, as you guys are the inaugural judges and it had to sit through all this. So thank you. But yeah, something to think of for next year. Our next one is one that has popped up twice, but keep in mind previously was for editor category. This is Chef versus O'Neill, and we will start with Priya.
Yeah, in the former category that we were ranking this, where Prone was number one, I remember this one was like a close number two for me, like editing wise, but also holistically. I wrote a lot of notes for this one. Coincidentally, strong narrative, very good setup. It was an exploration of a topic that I wasn't familiar with, which obviously doesn't have to do with the visuals, but visually, cinematography wise, the way that they conducted the interviews, I thought was really good. I really obviously liked the editing on this, even their music choices I noted in my notes. So this was another really strong one. I think there were a couple of others that I think visually may have been superior to this. So I'm definitely going to consider all of that as we rank, as we make our final rankings. But again, like holistically and looking at the whole picture, this was a really good one. And I did feel that the visuals and the editing really like elevated the story that they were telling.
Nathan O'Neill.
Yeah, I have to echo those thoughts. I believe this was pretty high up there for me as well in previous category. I just felt like the structure of the entire piece flowed really well for me. The editing was really nice. The graphical enhancements really helped drive the story whenever it could have been easy to get lost. And there was just a good sense of covering an issue where there are injustices that still span over the past 30 years, and they've just been fighting for this. So yeah, it definitely stood out for me. I think it's kind of one of my top ones still, but I'm still mentally grappling with all of this.
Raquel.
This was also one of my favorites. I really loved the opening scene. It was visually compelling. The photography was beautiful. The interviews were beautifully lit. It was just, I also enjoyed the graphics and the illustrations, and it was just a well thought out and yeah, very thoughtful. I feel like they went deep. They kind of took those extra steps to really like go in and like find the buildings that were still standing today and all of that. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I don't have any critiques really.
And Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, I think Rocky said pretty much everything I really love the moody opening. It's like riding to school, right? That's the best way. You're starting off your day. It's the best way to start off the dock. I thought that was, it added some drama to it, very low lit shots there. I just noted that there was some dolly work in the courtroom to kind of elevate some of the cinematography, which was nice. There wasn't a whole lot of that type of a thing in most of the other docs. So I thought that was very tasteful. The interviews were center framed and incredibly well lit, and they were all 2-camera interviews. So there was just a nice style to kind of elevate everything. I thought it was balanced between like, the courtroom stuff that was a little heavier and then the personal stories of the children. And I thought they did a really nice job of selecting the characters from students of all different walks of life, both like Black and Hispanic students, and then also I think even one white kid who was a minority in his school. So I thought that it was really balanced in terms of the different perspectives that they represented, and also diving into how the kids felt, did they feel like they stood out, or did they fit in, or what was that experience like? I thought it was really important how they tied in basically that housing and zoning for schools go hand in hand, and that you really can't fix one issue without fixing housing. I think that speaks to just how big the problem is, because it seems like a lot of cities don't want to fix those housing problems. And yeah, I really appreciated the story about the young man who just like, it was heartbreaking that he didn't get to go to a better school because he had to care for his mom, and he just simply got lost and didn't finish the right paperwork. It just goes to show that like life can really make it hard on kids who have more difficult situations at home or more responsibilities on their plate, that can unfortunately be to the detriment of how things turn out for them. That was pretty hardcore. So yeah, overall a very nice piece.
Next one is meet the formerly incarcerated fire crew. Um, let's start with Rocky.
I really loved the story. Um, it was honest and it was inspiring and it was engaging. I'm still trying to decide if I liked the visual edit of it kind of being overblown or not very contrasty at all. It felt very like bright and low contrast. And that might have, it's obviously a stylistic choice, but there were some scenes that felt overexposed and the quality kind of just wasn't there. But the story was wonderful. I loved the interviews and I really thought that it was an inspiring story to hear, especially being from California and having heard it on the news before, but not really ever getting to know the actual firefighters and inmates and what they have to go through. So, yeah.
Nathan O'Neill.
Yeah, I like the story. I like the premise of following this group of guys who are basically trying to rebuild a life for them, and physically it's about perseverance and resilience, right? And it takes a lot of that in order to do this type of work. I'm kind of there with Raquel a little bit as far as the visuals. I felt like this type of story, I mean, I think we didn't see any real like firefighting until like the end of it. So I was like, well, it kind of started a little slow for me as far as at the open. I think they had like a montage of the interviews, and that didn't just grab me right away. Unfortunately, I mean, I kept watching, but it didn't have the same kind of pull in terms of the structure of the story as some of the other entrants that had for us. So that's kind of my impressions on that.
Nathan Thompson.
Yeah, I really liked the story. I also didn't have it in my top picks necessarily, but I thought there were a lot of redeeming elements for sure. You know, they tied the whole program into history back in the 1800s with the Buffalo Soldiers, a historic African-American fire crew. So I thought that was an interesting kind of legacy tie-in. You know, you definitely felt like you were along for the challenge as they were struggling to get up the hills and like barely making it through the training. It showed their commitment, and it showed how they support one another. I also appreciated that they captured a woman's perspective as well, and a mother of a little girl. And it was really nice seeing the little girl look up at her mom and kind of, you know, seeing that someday she could be as awesome as her badass mom. I thought it was cool how they got into, you know, being in this program, how it can add legitimacy for you to tap into this bigger firefighter network to hopefully like continue to grow. Because it seemed like sometimes they could get stuck doing a little bit of grunt work and like roadside stuff and just doing grunt work for the state and not necessarily firefighting all the time. So it seemed like hopefully this is a step for them to like improve their life. One of the quotes that stuck out to me was one of the gentlemen said, it's a part of me starting to get my humanity back. And then I think the same fellow also said, I can change how people treat me by changing how I see myself. And I thought that was beautiful because he was starting to see himself in a different way, and he was starting to realize his potential. And I think one of my favorite scenes in the whole thing was just like a family dinner conversation, where one of the head of the program was giving his kids advice. He was just kind of writing them and telling his kids to pay attention to detail. And they were like, yeah, we've heard that before, Dad. Like, you're always telling us to pay attention to detail. But I just loved how it like showed that he's a good father, and he's working so hard to make sure that his crew succeeds and that his children succeed. And that was inspiring to see. So I guess I got a lot to talk about the piece. Yeah, maybe the videography was just a little bit like handheld and didn't strike me as like maybe quite as refined. But I do think it captured the story well.
I feel like you're gonna have a quote book after this weekend.
There's a lot of good nuggets. There really are.
Yeah. And last but not least, Miss Priya Matthew.
Yeah, I mean, everybody made such great points. I don't have much to add. I thought the story was really compelling too, and yeah, I loved hearing from all of the different characters. In terms of visual presentation, this was on the sort of like lower end of my ranking. There wasn't anything like visually that kind of like stood out to me, as Nate O'Neill mentioned. I mean, we kind of saw like some of the firefighting scenes towards the end, so it sort of took a while to get to that point. So this wasn't the most visually strong thing that we've seen today or in this category, but I commend the filmmakers for delving into the story, because it was really interesting to watch and listen to.
And then our final one in long form, The Intersection, Fatherhood at the Heart of George Floyd Square. Nathan Thompson is chewing, so I'm going to go Nathan O'Neill.
I really like this piece. The idea of following a father and son relationship, specifically in the Black community near George Floyd Square, as it's all unfolding, is particularly just like striking to me. There are so many moments from just capturing some of the conversations between the father and son that were pretty intimate, and I feel like you kind of see these conversations playing out in households all across the country as this is happening. You know, the death of and murder of George Floyd is captivating the country, but here we see it happening, and it's getting documented this way. I thought there were a few moments in here that really struck me as well. I believe the weird dynamic between the father and his sister, who is a police officer, and those conversations and kind of just listening in were really raw, and you can see the tension, and you can just feel that, I don't want to say animosity, but it's just this stress that's put on this family, and how that is like this little microcosm of like the bigger narrative that's going on in the country, in all these discussions. But overall, I really like this idea of just finding this core group of this core family and following them through the whole piece. I felt it was really digestible that way.
Natalicio.
I don't know how to follow that. Yeah, you said it all, Nathan. I loved the story. It was rich, it was personal. I kind of felt like I was a member of the family going with them throughout. I also love that we left George Floyd Square and we really got to know them, and that we got to know the kid too. Like, I like that he was part of being interviewed, that he was part of the storyline as well, like how it affected him. And it was very interesting to see what happened when they left that area and what that's like, because I feel like a lot of the times the story stays there because that's where it occurred. And it was really interesting to see how they felt in the quiet, like after you're in that space. I thought it was beautiful. It's actually one of my favorite ones. It was in the top 3 for sure. And yeah, it was just very emotional. I cried on this one. It was beautiful.
Mr. Thompson.
Yeah, the film definitely captured some amazing perspectives. I think it brought up a lot of complex questions about like what it is to be Black or white, since the little boy was biracial. And yeah, in that setting, I think you could just see his growth. I mean, I think one of the most unforgettable scenes is when the little boy does kind of his oration and his speech on the picnic table, and you see him pause and then really find his voice. Um, it was so powerful, and you saw him mature, as the film went on. Um, the relationship between the father and son, uh, it was incredible to see just male relationships with warmth and emotion. And the dad was probably crying more than anybody else. I'm a crier, so I'm like, uh, I think it's good to see male emotion, like on the screen, that it's okay, like you can be tough but you can still cry, like, and he was showing his son that. Yeah, it was is incredibly intimate. On the technical side, the only thing I would call out is it seemed like the um, videographer was maybe using autofocus a decent bit, and it would like shift quite a bit. And I was like, come on, don't do that. You don't need that. It's like make your choice, make your focus choice, and select it and control it. That's your job. So I mean that was recurring. So I think that was a common thing. So I wish there was a little improvement there. Um, some lines that stuck with me because I'm the quote guy. He said, "The police are everywhere. That's the biggest gang in the United States." It was hard hitting, and I forget who said this. I think it's the father. Was the father biracial? The father's biracial. Okay, so he said, "I know I'm white, but I know I'm black too. These are my people." And I thought that just spoke to the complexity of it, but that in this sense, he's going to step up and he's going to stand up for the people who are not being represented, and the people who are being hurt. Yeah, very powerful. Definitely in my top.
And again, last but not least, I'm sorry, Miss Prezy.
Um, everybody made such good points. There's literally nothing to add because you guys covered everything so beautifully. This was also one of my favorite ones, and in terms of ranking, this is like one of my higher ranked ones. I really love this. I felt gripped and connected to the story and the characters. I thought it was beautiful, the themes of fatherhood, and to Nathan's point of just the vulnerability and the emotion and the honesty um, within the family and between the father and the son. A couple of my notes, I mean, everybody covered this, but I just wrote very compelling, visually forward and strong. Narrative was very strong. Holistically, this was just a beautiful presentation. I even loved, the music choices and some of the montages. Um, good point, Nathan Thompson, about the autofocus. I wouldn't have caught that because I'm not a photojournalism maestro like you, but that's a good point to raise. But holistically, I thought this was just a really beautiful piece, and I commend the journalists who made this because what a wonderful presentation of themes of fatherhood and what it means to be a father today. And I just really liked it a lot.
Fantastic. Judges, now you have the hard part. Go into the Google Doc, cast your votes, and then we'll see where it is when the dust settles. All right. Poor Priya. So you going back and
That was
forth.
hard.
All right. This seems pretty straightforward though. First place, Heart of George Floyd Square. Second place, Day of Rage. Third place, Chef versus O'Neill. And fourth place, Between the Lines, Photojournalism and the Crossfire. There it is.
Wait, whose was this?
Huh?
Whose was this?
This is overall. This is just
Oh, okay.
looking down the line. So everyone's all unanimous on first place. Second place with 3 votes total, Day of Rage, and just most votes overall. Third place, everyone was unanimous. Chef versus O'Neill, and with 3 votes total, Between the Lines, the Photojournalism and the Crossfire, and then only 1 vote for Incarcerated Fire Crew. So first,
I guess
George Floyd.
my only question there is, as good as Day of Rage is, should it be more in an honorable mention since it had so much less actual like videography, like firsthand capture? It was much more of like an overarching overview than something that was filmed. Only because this is a best of photojournalism. I feel like the effort was different on that one. As good as it is, it's amazing. It's almost, in some ways, it almost deserves to win the whole thing, I feel like. But because of that photojournalism angle, that's why I was like, honorable mention, because it's just not as in-person live capture with people. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah, I was on that mindset as well. I feel, well, because we watched this batch first, right? So initially I was like, oh, Day of Rage, #1 for me. And then we continued to watch, and then I saw Reconstructing Rittenhouse, and then I was like, oh, I kind of questioned how I ranked this one based on that lack of original elements. So that's why I bumped it down to 2. But I still feel like it was exceptional in the fact that it's a documentary. It's a first draft of history, right? I mean, like, you look at that and you can show what happened for generations.
And also, it was just like a super sophisticated use of visuals. I totally take the point of like no original video, and that's why I ended up putting it as #2 also, because when I originally watched this, at least the first 20 minutes of the Rage one, I was like, oh, #1 for sure.
Right.
But just our helpful conversations today and the smart point that Nate brought up about no original video. It's like, yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Again, I don't know like how they would get original interviews thereafter, but maybe, if New York Times photographer was on the ground or something, that would have made a difference, or if he did interviews with people like that. But I just think this was just a really sophisticated, smart, innovative use of videos. And I mean, it was visual storytelling from like a journalism standpoint at its most sophisticated, I think, which is why I would still rank it really high. But I totally take your point.
Even, I guess, now that I think about it, arguably adding interviews could have watered it down and made it less clear and, so yeah, point taken. Cool. Just wanted to talk through it.
Absolutely. Good point. I think everyone's voting lines up with the description of the category.
Cool.
And again, you still have Doc of the Year to choose as well. So if everyone's comfortable, I think we're going to lock it in then. So students, we will go first place, The Intersection, Fatherhood at the Heart of George Floyd. Second place will be Day of Rage. Third place will be Chef versus O'Neill. And honorable mention will be Between the Lines, photojournalism and the Crossfire.